In this last section, we're going to be talking about conserving biodiversity and what we can do about that. Natural resources are those that are naturally found, and the earth actually um, gives us most of everything that we need. I mean, essentially, you can look at everything can be tied back to something natural that was here that we use for our needs. So, natural resources per capita, that means for how many people are in the United States, we are the dark purple, meaning we are using so many natural resources per person. And then the lighter colors, they're not using very many natural resources at all. I don't think that this is the best graph of that. I think I prefer to look at something like this. Here's the household electricity consumption. If you look at it, you can see the United States is not the worst. Actually, slightly worse than us is Canada. But Canada's up there freezing all the time, right? So they're very, very cold. So they're a first world country. They're very cold. They're using a lot. Down here, I know that we're using a lot of air conditioning, but still, we are using a ton of natural resources for each person. When there's other third or first world countries, like countries that are wealthy enough, like Germany or Japan, that are using less than half that we are. So they're using a great deal less, like the United Kingdom. They survive on about a third of what we use per person. So there's other very developed countries that are using a lot less stuff than the United States. Um, and then, of course, there's some other countries that are more developing countries that are using almost nothing. If you look at even water usage, here, like the drought was called off. And as soon as they called off a drought in 2017, we just jumped our water uses back up. And then it's kind of come down because they started it again. But interestingly, you can see here in Beverly Hills in the orange, a kind of wealthy, I'm famous type of population is using more than the average Californian. So some of this is linked to like wealth and entitlement, and I should be able to use as much as I want. And so changing that mentality to more of a I'm going to use less because it's good for everybody else and it's good for the earth is like kind of a mentality shift. There is a such thing called renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Non-renewable resources that in our lifetime or in a usable amount of time, they're not going to come back around and make more. So some of those could be mineral deposits, which will get formed slowly over time as volcanoes happen and things, but not necessarily in our lifetime. Coal, natural gas, oil, these take long periods of time, millions of years to form. And so they're considered non-renewable. They're here and then they're going to be gone once we use them up. A renewable resource is one that we can renew and get over time. For example, there's some wood, such as pine, that grows very, very quickly, bamboo that grows very quickly, and you can use it over and over again, where there's some other wood that takes many years to grow, sometimes 100 or more years to grow. Sustainable use is using things in a way or at a rate that it can be replaced. So sustainable is like you're not taking any more than what can regrow or replant over that period of time. Sustainable is where we want to get with things. So how do we slow down extinction? How can you slow down extinction? Use things sustainably, use renewable resources so they can be replaced, protect the land where you can, use bioremediation. We will talk about that, but that's natural methods of solving problems instead of using chemicals or things like that. And then support laws that help humans and nature coexist together instead of kind of pitting them against one another. So there's certain protected lands in the United States, like our national parks, this has been really helpful in preserving a lot of our biodiversity, and there's some international protected areas. We actually in Southern California live in what is called a biodiversity. I'm going to try and zoom out, a biodiversity hotspot. This is a huge, big deal. So if you can see California here, we are actually number one on that list for the California floristic province. We live here, and that means that we have a huge percentage of native species, but over 70% of our habitat has been lost. And so we have a very large number of plants and animals that are on the verge of going extinct, and many that already have. So what it's basically saying is you are a place with tons of biodiversity, but you've also killed a lot of it and there's not much left. So be really careful with what you have. So the California Floristic Province is a biodiversity hotspot, and there's so many in the world, not very many that are classified that way in the world. So it's kind of awesome that we have all that biodiversity down here. And if you feel like, wait, I never see biodiversity here, it's because we've lost more than 70% of those wild spaces. So it's important to preserve what we have. So there is one way to preserve biodiversity, and that is making a corridor in between spaces so that animals can safely cross. And if you're sitting there going, come on, a deer is just going to run straight on the road, it's not going to do that. Well, in some cases that's true. You can see they've put up some fencing to try and stop that, though a deer can go straight over that. But interestingly, there's been a large number of animals, and I'm going to try and show you some animals that actually use corridors. A crab is not very smart. These are called red crabs. They're not the brightest creatures on the planet. And yet on Christmas Island, where millions of these hatch every year and go down the roads, they were getting smashed by cars and just turning into a red mush. So they've made these corridors to go under gutters. They've made some corridors to go over the land. And look at the crabs follow right along, and they're using it. They're learning how to use these routes. And in places where they don't have those routes, they are covering the ground and just getting smashed. But you can see all kinds of different interesting corridors. I actually found this cool website called Conservation Corridor, where you can see that same picture that's out of your book, but you can see a number of different corridors that have been made. I loved this one in Kenya, where they have the elephants go straight under the road. There you go. And they're obviously using it. There's some really cool corridors for animals so that they can go across. And at least it gives them a pathway to safely cross. The next thing is to restore ecosystems. So here's different disasters and how long it takes to recover. Human-made disasters, which can be in blue or yellow, take a really long time to recover from. And yet other things like natural disasters tend not to take as long, or the mess that's made isn't quite as big a lot of times. So it's easier for the land to recover from a natural disaster than a human-made one. Let me see if there's one more. I think there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was controlling invasive species. That's really important to not bring in invasive species. There's all kinds of natural things that you can plant in your yard, like that are native. They'll use less water. They'll look pretty at different times of the year, so they won't die, and they'll support the native animals that live here. You want to do that. And of course, don't release your pets that you don't want. It's not safe for them, and it's not safe for the environment. They can have different diseases. So that is our little lecture on natural and resources and conserving biodiversity. Take care and have